Okay, players, I want a good, clean match. I want to see a well-dignified game. No MMA trash talking, and I want to see all moves done within the allotted time. And remember, if you touch it, you'll have to move it. I'm looking at you, Harry. So, with that said, let's have a good match. Greetings and welcome back to Checkpoint Gaming, Chess. With this episode, we will be going over the rules for competitive play. With that of competitive chess, we're using the rules established by the World Chess Federation as the basis for this episode, although we included some other rules from other organizations as well. The World Chess Federation is also known by its French name of Fédération Internationale des Échecs, thus causing it to be known by the abbreviation of FIDE. But with that said, it's not the only rule set that is available out there for people to use, such as that developed by the United States Chess Federation. So if what is presented in this episode is different than that of what you're accustomed to, that is the reason why. And when a player enters a competition, they not only have the right, but an obligation to know what the rules and conditions are for the tournament being played. We also divided these rules into 3 parts: base rules, advanced rules, and advanced rules. To help differentiate between these, different voice talents are going to be used, with Taylor being used for the base rules,
Jack for advanced rules,
and Hades for the advanced rules.
When it comes to that of the chess clock, it is a clock that possesses 2 time displays that are connected to each other in such a manner that only one display is able to run at a time. In reference to a clock, it refers to one of these 2 time displays, with each time display possessing a flag. In regards to flag fall, it refers to the expiration of time that has been allotted to a given player. During the game, each player will pause their given clock after they performed their move, which will cause their opponent's clock to start. So, basically speaking, after making their move, each player is to press down upon their clock, thus completing their move. A move is also considered to be complete when one of the following is performed. The move causes the game to end, or performed a move while their opponent is yet to complete theirs. Players will have to be allowed to pause their given clock after performing their move, even when the opponent has performed theirs. With the time that has elapsed between the move upon the board and pressing the clock, it is considered part of the time that has been allotted to the player. When it comes time to press their given clock, the player will have to use the same hand that they used to move their given piece, and it is illegal for a player to keep their finger on the clock or hovering near it. Players are also forbidden from picking up the clock. When it comes to that of the chess clock, it will have to be dealt with properly. What this means is that it's illegal for the players to forcibly press down upon the clock, press the clock before making a move, or to knock it over. And only the player who possesses a running clock is allowed to move and adjust their pieces. With the adjusting of a player's clock, it can be done by the arbiter in such a way where it is equitable to the situation at hand. But with that said, this clock adjustment is not to be applied to the clock of a disabled player. When a chess clock is being used, then each player will have to complete a minimum number of moves, or all moves within the allotted amount of time, including any additional time that was added with each move. All of this will have to be specified in advance. With the time that is saved by a player during one given period, it is added to the time available to be used in the next period where it is applicable, unless the game is in time delay mode. In regards to time delay mode, both players will receive an allotment of main thinking time. Each player will also receive extra time for every move, with this time being fixed. With the countdown for hat of this main thinking time, it only starts after the fixed extra time has expired, provided that the player presses their clock before the fixed extra time has expired. Then the main thinking time will not change, irrespective of how much of the fixed extra time was used. Once the flag falls, the requirements that are connected with additional time are to be added with each move that was made. Before play begins, the arbiter is to decide where the chess clock is to be placed. When it's time to start the game, the player that possesses the white pieces is to start play by initiating their respective clock. With organized events, their regulations will specify what the default time is going to be for the game, which is done in advance. But if the default time hasn't been specified, then it is that of 0. So if any player arrives at the table after the default time has started, then said player will automatically lose. This sounds like a good reason to get there on time, ready to play. The exception to this is when the arbiter decides or the rules states otherwise. This appears to be working off of a cultural standard that operates off of clock time instead of event time, where people are expected to show up and be ready according to a predetermined time, instead of having a laid-back approach and having things play out whenever people decide to show up. If a tournament's regulation states that its default time is that of anything other than 0 and neither player is initially present at the table, then white is to lose all of the time that has elapsed until they arrive. The exception to this is if the event regulation specifies or the arbiter decides otherwise. For a flag to be considered fallen, the arbiter will have to observe it or when either player makes a valid claim to that effect. Unless one of the conditions have been met for game completion, if a player isn't able to complete the predetermined number of moves within the allotted time, then said player is to lose that game. But if the opponent is unable to checkmate the player's king through any possible series of legal moves, then the game is considered to be a draw. With every indication that is given upon the chess clock, it is considered conclusive unless an evident defect is present. If a defect is evident, then the chess clock is to be replaced by an arbiter with said arbiter using their best judgment when it comes to that of determining the times that are to be shown upon the replacement chess clock. And if one or both clocks of the chess clock are found to be incorrect during gameplay, then one of the players or the arbiter is to immediately stop the chess clock. From there, the arbiter is to install the correct setting as well as to adjust the times and move counters if necessary. The arbiter is to use their best judgment when it comes to determining the clock settings, and if an irregularity occurs and/or the pieces will have to be moved to a previous position, then the arbiter is to use their best judgment when it comes to that of resetting the clocks. If the game needs to be interrupted for one reason or another, then the arbiter is to stop the chess clock. A player is also able to stop the chess clock, but only when they need to obtain the arbiter's assistance. From there, the arbiter is to decide when the game is to restart. It is worth noting that when a player pauses the chess clock in order to get an arbiter, the arbiter has the right to determine if the player has a valid reason for pausing the game. If the player doesn't have a valid reason for pausing the game, then the player is to be penalized for the situation. When it comes to that of screens, monitors, or demonstration boards that shows the current position of the pieces upon the chessboard, the moves and number of moves that have been made and/or completed, and clocks which also show the number of moves, they're allowed to exist within the playing hall. But with that said, players are not allowed to make a claim while relying solely upon the information that is presented in such a manner. When it comes to the situation where both flags have fallen and it is impossible for anyone to determine which flag fell first, then the game is to continue to be played for a given period of time except for the last period, or the game is deemed a draw if it happens during a point in the game where all of the remaining moves have been completed. If an irregularity occurs during gameplay and the pieces have to be restored to a previous position, then the arbiter is to use their best judgment in determining the times that are to be displayed upon the chess clock, which includes not changing the clock times at all. They shall also adjust the clock's move counter as well if necessary. If it's learned that the initial position of the pieces was incorrect, then the game is to be cancelled and a new game is to be played. If, during the game, it has been determined that the chessboard has been incorrectly placed, the game is to continue, but with the pieces being moved onto a chessboard that has been correctly placed upon the play area. If the game begins with the colors being reversed and less than 10 moves have been made by both players, then the game is to end with a new game being played, with the colors being correct unless the arbiter rules otherwise. But if 10 or more moves have been made, then the game is to continue as is. If a player displaces one or more pieces found upon the board, then they are to re-establish the pieces into their correct position on their own time. If it is deemed necessary to do so, either player can pause the chess clock and ask for assistance from an arbiter. The arbiter also has the right to penalize the player who displaced the pieces. For an illegal move to be completed, the player who is performing said action will have to press their clock, which includes failing to meet the pawn promotion requirements or the capturing of the opponent's king. As the game unfolds and an illegal move has been completed, then the position that occurred immediately before it shall be reinstalled. If the position immediately before the irregularity is unable to be determined, then the game is to continue from the last identifiable position that occurred prior to said irregularity, with the clock being adjusted accordingly. When it comes to that of replacing the illegal move, the touch rule and the legal square movement rules are suspended. Once that has been completed, the game is to continue from this reinstated position. If a player moved one of their pawns to the furthest distant rank, presses the clock, and fails to replace said pawn with a new piece, then the move is classified as being illegal. The pawn is to be replaced by a queen that is of the same color as the pawn, and if a player presses their clock without performing a move, then it is considered to be an illegal move and is to be penalized accordingly. In addition to this, if a player uses both hands to make a single move followed by pressing the clock, it is also considered to be illegal and to be penalized accordingly. After performing an action when it comes to that of the irregularity rules for the first completed illegal move by a player, the arbiter is to give 2 additional minutes to the player's opponent. If the same player performed a second illegal action, the arbiter will declare the game lost for said player, although some people can claim that this occurs when the player performs their third illegal move instead of their second. But with all of that said, the game is deemed to be a draw if the position is such that the opponent will be unable to checkmate the player's king by any possible series of moves. During the course of the game, if any piece gets displaced from its current square, then the position that existed before the irregularity is to be reinstated. But if the position that was found immediately before the irregularity can't be determined, then the game is to continue from the last identifiable position that existed prior to the irregularity, with the clocks being adjusted accordingly. From there, the game is to continue from this reinstated position. During the course of play, each player is required to track their own moves along with the moves of their opponent in the correct manner, move for move, in a clear and legible manner. And there are 2 ways to do this. First is to use the algebraic notation system upon a paper score sheet. Second is to use the FID-certified electronic score sheet that has been prescribed for the given competition. With the recording of moves, players are forbidden from recording them in advance unless a draw is being declared in accordance with the rules that have been addressed earlier. A player is able to reply to their opponent's move before they go about recording it if said player wishes to do so. With that said, the player will have to record their previous move before they are allowed to make another one. The actions associated with the score sheet are for the recording of moves, the times found upon the clocks, offers made for a draw, matters pertaining to a claim, and any other relevant data for the game. With offers pertaining to that of a draw, both players will have to record it on the score sheet using an equal symbol. If one of the players is unable to keep score, such as due to a medical handicap, religious reasons that are acceptable at the arbiter's discretion, or are a new player to the game who hasn't learned how to keep track of the score, then an assistant may be provided by said player to perform this action for them. But with that said, the assistant will have to be acceptable by an arbiter. The player's clock is to be adjusted by the arbiter in a way that is equitable to the situation. This clock adjustment is not to be applied to the disabled player. But if players are excused from keeping score, they lose the right to make claims that require a score sheet, which makes sense since they lack the means to make such a challenge. With the score sheet, it is the property of the event's organizers, and it is to be visible to the arbiter through the course of the game. When it comes to that of electronic score sheets, if it possesses an evident defect, then it is to be replaced by the arbiter. If a player possesses less than 5 minutes upon their given clock during the allotted time and doesn't have any additional time that consists of 30 seconds or more to added with each move made, then said player isn't obligated to meet the requirements listed with the recording of moves for the remainder of their allotted time. But immediately after a flag has fallen, then the player will have to update their given score sheet completely before they move a piece upon the chessboard. If neither player was keeping score as described earlier, or is required to keep score, then the arbiter or an assistant should do what they can to be present and keep score as the game unfolds. In this case, once a flag has fallen, then the arbiter is to stop the chess clock. From there, both players are to update their score sheets by using the arbiter's or opponent's score sheet to do so. But if only one player hasn't been keeping track of the score, then they will have to completely update their given score sheet before they move one of their pieces upon the chessboard as soon as either flag has fallen. If it's that player's move, then they can use their opponent's score sheet, returning it to their opponent before they make a move. But if no completed score sheet is available, then the players will have to reconstruct the game on a second chessboard under the control and supervision of the arbiter or assistant. The arbiter or assistant is to first record the actual game position, clock times, whose clock was running at the time, and the number of moves that have been made and completed, assuming that this information is available before the reconstruction process takes place. If the score sheets are unable to be brought up to date showing that a player has overstepped the time that has been allocated to them, then the next move to be made is considered as the first move of the following time period unless evidence exists that there are more moves that have been made or completed. When the game has been concluded, then both players are to indicate the result of said game upon both score sheets by signing them or to approve the result upon their electronic score sheets. Even if the results are incorrect, this result is to stand unless the arbiter decides otherwise. When it comes to that of the regulations of an event, it can specify that the players can't offer or agree to a draw, whether it is done in less than the specified number of moves or at all, without the consent of the arbiter. But if the event regulations do allow for a draw agreement, then the following are to apply. If a player wishes to offer a draw, they're to do so after having made a move upon the chessboard and before pressing their given clock. Although an offer can be made at any other time during gameplay and considered to be valid, the rules pertaining to distracting or annoying the opponent will have to be consulted, something that we'll be addressing later in this episode. With that said, no conditions are allowed to be attached to said offer. This is chess, not the halls of any governmental body responsible for making laws and regulations where deals, bribery, and favors are made to get certain things passed into law. In either case, the draw offer can't be withdrawn, and it is to remain valid until their opponent either accepts it, verbally rejects it by touching a piece with the intention of either moving or capturing it, or the game comes to an end through some other means. Regarding an offer of a draw, it is to be recorded upon the score sheet of both players. When it comes to that of a draw under the rules that we're going to address momentarily, it is considered to be an offer of a draw. The game is to be considered a draw when a correct claim by a player has moved one of their pieces when the same position for at least the third time, but not necessarily by a repetition of a given movement, under one of the following conditions. First, when this third position is about to appear, said player will have to indicate said move before anything else which is unable to be changed, record it upon the score sheet, and declare to the arbiter their intent of making this given move. Second, when the third position has just appeared, the player that is claiming the draw is in possession of the move. In order for positions to be considered the same, they have to occur when the same player possesses a move, pieces that are of the same kind and color are occupying the same squares, and the moves that are possible, moves that exist for all of the pieces, are the same for both players. But these positions aren't the same if a pawn was able to be captured en passant, or a king that is in possess of castling rights is yet to move. For a game to be considered a draw, it has to fall under one of these conditions. First is when the player indicates that their move, which is recorded upon the score sheet and declared to the arbiter that they intend to perform this move, will result in the last 50 moves of each player being made without the movement of any of their pawns and without any captures. Second is when the last 50 moves that were made by each player have been completed without moving any of their pawns and without performing any captures. And if a player touches a piece as described earlier, will lose the right to claim a draw on that move. When a player claims a draw, then the chess clock is to be paused by said player or the arbiter, with the player who made the draw claim being unable to withdraw the claim. If the claim is deemed to be correct, then the game is to immediately end in a draw. But if the claim is deemed to be incorrect, then the arbiter is to add 2 minutes to the opponent's remaining time, although some rules will have this time be 3 minutes instead. From there, the game is to continue. And if the claim of a draw is based upon an intended move, then this move will have to be made in accordance with the rules that have been addressed earlier. In addition to this, if one or both of the following situations occur, then the game ends in a draw. First is if the same position has appeared at least 5 times during the game. Second is if any series of at least 75 moves have been made by each player without them moving any of their pawns or fails to capture. But if the last move results in a checkmate, then that shall take precedence. So if a position has been reached where a checkmate is unable to occur through any series of legal moves, then the game is deemed a draw, assuming that the move that produces this position is legal.
If quick play finish is being used during the competition, then the following rules are to be used, and it occurs in the phase when all remaining moves will have to be made within a limited amount of time. With the player whose turn it is to make a move has less than 2 minutes left on their clock, then they are allowed to claim a draw before their given flag falls. From there, said player is to summon the arbiter and to stop the clock. If the arbiter agrees that the opponent isn't making any effort to win the game through normal means, or that it isn't possible for the players to win by normal means, then the arbiter is to declare the game to be a draw. Otherwise, the arbiter is to postpone their decision or to reject the draw claim. If the arbiter decides to postpone their decision, then the opponent is to be awarded 2 extra minutes with the game continuing. And if possible, this is to be done in the presence of the arbiter. When it comes to the final result of the game, the arbiter is to do so later or as soon as it is possible after a flag has fallen. They're then to declare that the game is a draw if they agree that the final position can't result in a win through that of normal means or that the opponent isn't making a sufficient effort to win. But if the arbiter rejects the claim, then the opponent is to receive 2 extra minutes for play, and with the decision of the arbiter, it is final when it comes to this quick play finish.
When playing with quick play finish rules and there isn't an arbiter present at the venue, a player will be able to claim a draw when there is less than 2 minutes left upon their given clock and their flag is yet to fall. In order for a player to declare a draw, their opponent will be unable to win through that of normal means, and/or their opponent is making no effort to try and win. In situations where the opponent is making no effort to win the game, it's safe to conclude that it's intentional and to think that they're being a pretentious asshole, not unlike overly competitive Warhammer 40k players. If the opponent is unable to win through that of normal means, then the player is to write down the final position with the opponent verifying it. But if the opponent is not trying to win through that of normal means, then the player is to write down the final position and submit an up-to-date score sheet to the tournament organizers with the opponent verifying both the score sheet as well as the final position. The claim is to be referred to that of an arbiter's decision with their decision being final.
Unless it is otherwise stated by the regulation rules, the player who wins their given game through play or forfeit will score 1 point. The player who lost their game through play or forfeit will score no points, and any player who experiences a drawn game will score half a point. When it comes to that of the total score for any given game, it can never exceed the maximum score that can be given for that given game, with the scores that are given to any given player having to be those that are normally associated with the game. When it comes to games that weren't finished by the time that the prescribed play comes to an end, then the arbiter will require the player that possesses the move to seal that given move. From there, the player is to record their move in an unambiguous notation upon their given score sheet, put their score sheet and the score sheet of their opponent into an envelope, seal said envelope, and then stop the chess clock without triggering their opponent's clock. Until the player stops the chess clock, the player retains the right to change their sealed move. If the player is told by the arbiter to seal their move and said player will perform the move upon the chessboard, then they'll have to write the move that they just performed upon their score sheet as their sealed move. The player who has the move and adjourns the game before the end of the play session is considered to have sealed that game at the nominal time for the end of the session, and the remaining time for said player is to be recorded upon the score sheet. With the envelope, the following information is to be found upon it: the name of both players, the color of each player, the position found immediately before the sealed move, the time that was used by each player, the name of the player who possessed the sealed move, the corresponding number of the sealed move, the offer of a draw if the proposal is current, and the date, time, and venue of the resumption of play. Each player should also sign said envelope as a means of indicating that they understand and verify the information found upon it. The arbiter is to check the accuracy of the information that is presented upon the envelope, as well as to be entrusted with its safekeeping. If the player proposes a draw after their opponent has sealed their move, the offer is a valid one until the opponent decides to either accept or reject it. Before the game resumes, the position found immediately before the sealed move is to be set up upon the chessboard, along with the times that were used by each player when the game was adjourned, reflected upon the clock upon resumption. But if the players agree to a draw before the resumption of the game, or one of the players notifies the arbiter that they are resigning, then the game is to be concluded. With the opening of the envelope, it is only done when the player who has to reply to the move that was sealed is present. Unless the game reaches the completion steps mentioned earlier, the player doesn't complete the prescribed number of moves within the allotted time, or the game ends in a draw, the player will lose the game if their recorded move upon the sealed score sheet or envelope is ambiguous. It is recorded in such a way that the true significance of the information is impossible to determine, or it is illegal. If reaching the agreed-upon time of restarting the game and the player having to reply to the sealed move is present, then the envelope is opened, the sealed move is made upon the chessboard, and the responding player will start their clock. But if the replying player to the sealed move isn't present, then their clock is to be started. When said player does finally return to the venue, they're to stop their clock and summon the arbiter, where the envelope is then to be opened, and the sealed move is to be made upon the chessboard. Once that has been completed, the replying player is to restart their given clock. But if the player who sealed the move isn't present, then the clock of the replying player is to be started with their opponent having the right to record their reply upon the score sheet, seal their score sheet within a new envelope, pause their clock, and start the clock of the absent player instead of making their reply in the normal manner. If they do this, then the envelope is to be handed off to the arbiter for safekeeping and is to be opened once the absent player returns to continue playing. If any player arrives at the chessboard after a predetermined amount of time, then they are to lose the game unless the arbiter decides otherwise. But with that said, if the sealed move results in the game reaching a conclusion, then that given conclusion is to be applied to that given game. If the regulations of a given event specify that the default time is anything other than 0, then the following condition is to be applied. If neither player is initially present, then the player who has to reply to the sealed move is to lose all of the time that has elapsed until they finally arrive. This is true unless the event regulations state, or the arbiter decides otherwise. If the envelope that contains the sealed move somehow ends up missing, then 1. The arbiter failed to do their job in securing said envelope, and 2. The game is to continue from the adjourned position using the clock times that were recorded at the time of adjournment. If the time that was used by each player is unable to be reestablished, then the arbiter is to set the clocks. The player that made the sealed move is to make the move that they recorded at the time of sealing. But if it is determined that reestablishing the sealed game is to be impossible, then the game is to be annulled and a new game is to be played. When restarting the game and either player points out that the time has been incorrectly indicated upon either clock before making their first move, then the error is to be corrected. But if the error isn't corrected, then the game is to continue without making this correction unless the arbiter decides otherwise. With the duration of the resumed session, it is to be controlled by the arbiter's timepiece, where the start time and end time are to be announced in advance. With the tournament schedule, it is used to determine the game times with all games being played within the venue, and with the times decided by the organizers unless the arbiter states otherwise. If the arbiter grants a player a late start, then their opponent is not to start the player's clock until the specified time dictated by the arbiter. The arbiter is to also inform the opponent about this delayed start by either writing it upon the new time upon the pairing sheet or by informing the opponent. But if the arbiter fails to notify the opponent about the delayed start time, and the opponent starts the player's clock at the originally scheduled start time, which is to be expected, then 1. The arbiter should receive a slap on the wrist, and 2. The opponent is to reset the clocks in order to reflect the revised starting time, thus granting the player the promised time the arbiter gave them. That makes sense, since a person shouldn't be penalized for someone else's mistake. With that said, changes made to the start time of any given round should only be done in the event of an emergency. On top of this, making rounds begin earlier than what was previously scheduled is undesirable, since it can cause players to forfeit or lose time because of the change. And unless it is announced in advance regarding the adjournment of all games at a specific time, the arbiter has discretion of when to adjourn any given game after the first time control occurs. Although the wall clock is to control the duration of all games being played, the arbiter is to refrain from adjourning a game that has one or both players found in serious time trouble. If needed for the beginning of the next round, a game can be adjourned in a secondary time control period where one player is found short of time while the other player possesses a large amount of time. And though one player might be found in a time pressure situation, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll end soon, thus causing a delayed start of the next round. With tournaments that see more than one round being played per day, it is customary to allow a player who saw their game be adjourned to receive a standard amount of time to allow them to eat or rest before the next game begins. With this time, 30 minutes is commonly used. Occasionally, they might require the opponent of the next round to start the game after the regularly scheduled start time has been initiated. When it comes to that of player behavior, there are a few guidelines that are in place that the players will have to follow. First, no player shall engage in any action that will bring the game of chess into disrepute. Second, the playing venue is defined as the playing area with restrooms, toilets, refreshment areas, smoking areas, and any other places that have been designated by the arbiter. On top of this, the playing area is defined as the area where the games of the competition are to be held. The players are also not allowed to do any of the following unless they have permission from the arbiter. This includes leaving the playing venue, the player possessing the move to leave the playing area, and any person other than that of the player or arbiter is allowed access to the playing area. With the regulations of any given event, it can specify that the opponent of the player who possesses the move will have to report to the arbiter when they wish to leave the playing area. Third, players are forbidden from using any notes, sources of information, sources of advice, or analyze any game that is occurring upon another chessboard during play. During the game, players are forbidden from possessing any electronic device that isn't specifically approved by the arbiter within the playing venue. With that said, the tournament's regulations might allow such devices to be stored within the player's bag, provided that said device has been turned off with said bag being placed into an area that has been approved by the arbiter. On top of this, players are forbidden to use or otherwise access this bag without obtaining permission from the arbiter. If it is evident that a player possesses such a device on their person while within the playing area, they will lose their game. But if the tournament regulations state otherwise, then a lesser penalty is to be given to the offending player. The arbiter can also require that a player have their clothing, bag, other items, or body be inspected, much like a security line at the airport, with this inspection to be done in private. The arbiter, or a person that has been authorized by the arbiter, shall conduct this inspection as long as the inspector is the same gender as the player. But if the player refuses to cooperate with these obligations, then the arbiter is to take steps that are to be addressed later within this episode. When it comes to smoking, which includes e-cigarettes but excludes hard street drugs, or worse, your dad, it is only allowed in the section of the venue that has been designated by the arbiter. Fourth, players who finished playing their game are considered to be spectators. Fifth, players aren't allowed to distract or otherwise annoy their opponent in any way, shape, or form. This includes making unreasonable claims, unreasonable offers of a draw, or introducing a source of noise within the playing area. So basically, don't be a dick or an asshole, which should make sense to anyone who have any sense of character or moral compass, but apparently that's asking too much in our current cultural climate at the time of writing this episode. Sixth, if any infraction is to occur with the rules that have just been described, the offender is to be penalized in accordance with the rules that we'll touch upon later in this episode. Seventh, if a player persists in refusing to abide by the laws of chess, then they're to be penalized by losing the game with the arbiter deciding upon what the score is to be for their opponent. But if both players are found guilty of this, then both players are deemed to have lost the game. So much like life, both people are able to end up being losers in a given situation. That's just the way of the world. Eighth, players have the right to request clarification from the arbiter regarding a particular point in the laws of chess. Ninth, unless stated otherwise by the tournament regulations, players are able to attempt an appeal against any decision that the arbiter has made, even if the player has already signed their given scorecard. 10th, both players will have to assist the arbiter in any situation that requires the reconstruction of the game, including when an offer of a draw was made. And 11th, checks pertaining to the 3 times occurrence of the position or a 50 moves claim is made, then it is the duty of the players to perform this under the supervision of the arbiter. With the role of the arbiter, it is to ensure that the laws of chess are followed, ensuring that fair play occurs, to act in the best interest of the competition, a good playing environment is maintained, that the players are not disturbed during play, supervise the progress of the competition, take necessary steps when it comes to the interests of disabled players along with those who need medical attention, and to follow the fair play rules or guidelines. So the arbiter is to observe the games, especially those that see the players being short of time, enforce decisions that they made, and to impose penalties when it is appropriate to do so. The arbiter is also allowed to appoint assistants in order to observe games that require observation and award one or both players additional time in the event that external disturbances occur during the game. But the arbiter is not allowed to intervene in any game except in situations where it is described by the laws of chess. They're also not to indicate how many moves have been completed except for when it comes to that of incomplete score sheets after at least one flag has fallen. The arbiter is to refrain from informing a player when their opponent has completed a move or that a player has yet to press their clock. Basically, their principal role is to be a silent observer. If an irregularity is observed, then the person who observed it can only report it to the arbiter. Both players found in other games and spectators are not allowed to speak about or otherwise interfere with another game. When someone violates this, the arbiter can expel them from the playing area. And unless authorized by the arbiter, it is forbidden for anyone to use their mobile phone or any other form of communication device within the playing venue or within any contiguous area that has been designated by the arbiter. When it comes to the options that are available for an arbiter to use in regards to penalties, they consist of warnings, to increase the remaining time of the offender's opponent, to reduce the remaining time of the offending player, to increase the points that are scored in the game of the opposing player to the maximum available points for said game, to reduce the points that are scored in the game of the offending player, to declare the game to have been lost for the offending player, which shall include deciding upon the opponent's score, to issue a fine that has been announced in advance, to have the offending player be excluded from one or more rounds of play, and to expel the offending player from the competition. The arbiter can issue one or more of these penalties to a single player. When it comes to the International Chess Federation, it only recognizes one notation system when it comes to that of its tournaments, and that is the algebraic system, and it encourages its use in literature and periodicals pertaining to chess. Because of this, a notation system other than that of algebraic are not allowed when recording upon the score sheets in a tournament. If an arbiter notices a different notation system being used, they're to inform said player about this given requirement. With the algebraic system, a piece is in reference to that of any chess piece other than a pawn. When indicating any given piece, it is done using an abbreviation, and with the English language, it is typically the first letter of the piece's name, and it is capitalized. So, with the king, it is represented with a K. With the queen, it is represented by a Q. With the rook, it is represented by an R. With the bishop, it is represented by a B. And with the knight, since K is used for the king, it is represented by an N instead. But if the player's native language is something other than English, they're allowed to use the abbreviation of the piece names in their given language. When it comes to that of printed periodicals, it is recommended that illustrated depictions are used for each piece. When it comes to the pawns, they're not indicated by a P. Instead, they're represented by an absence of said letter. With their abbreviation, they're indicated by the lowercase letters for the file section of the abbreviation, going from left to right for the white player and from right to left for the black player, and consists of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H respectively. For the rank section of the abbreviation, going from left to right for the white player and from right to left for the black player, it consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 respectively. Because of this, the initial positioning of the white pieces and their accompanying pawns will take up the first and second ranks, while the black pieces and their accompanying pawns will take up the 8th and 7th ranks respectively. Due to the rules that have just been described, each of the 64 squares are indicated by their unique combination of letter and number. So for movement of a given piece, it is indicated by the abbreviation of the piece's name along with the square that represents its arrival, with no need to hyphenate the name and the square. When it comes to that of the pawns, only the square of arrival is to be indicated. For those who are interested in longer format recording, include the square of departure as well. When one piece captures another, an X is to be marked between the name of the piece that was captured along with the square that the capturing piece arrives in. When it comes to that of a pawn that engages in a capturing move, the file of departure will have to be indicated followed by an X with the square of arrival ending this given sequence. In the situation of an en passant capture, the annotation of EP is to be used in the notation which represents the square of arrival given where the capturing pawn comes to rest. If there are two identical pieces that are able to move into the same square, then the piece that is moved is to be indicated in the following manner. First, if both pieces are on the same rank, then use the abbreviation of the piece name, followed by the file of departure, and then closing this off with the square of arrival. Second, if both pieces are on the same file, then use the abbreviation of the piece name, followed by the rank of departure, and then closing this off with the square of arrival. And third, if the pieces are found on different ranks and files, then the first method is to be used. In the situation where a pawn gets promoted, the actual move of said pawn is to be indicated followed by immediately recording the abbreviation of the first letter for the new piece. When it comes to that of an offer of a draw, it is to be marked by an equal sign. With a 0-0, it represents castling with the rook found in h1 or h8, whichever represents that of a kingside castling. With a 0-0-0, it represents castling with the rook found in a1 or a8, whichever represents that of a queenside castling. With that of X, it represents captures. With that of plus, it represents a check, while a ++ or a hashtag represents a checkmate. With that of EP, it represents an en passant capture. It is worth noting that these last 4 notations are optional when it comes to recording upon the score sheet. So with that said, that is what you need to know about the rules for competitive play. With that taken care of, we can start talking about variants. If you liked this episode, feel free to give it a like, and if you want to stay up to date on any future episodes we upload, go ahead and subscribe. You can also support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/checkpointgaming. See you in the next episode, and happy gaming.